entry. Monday, the 19th of May 2025. I'm out for my early evening jog as a way of dealing with and clearing the head when living with the sociopathic mother-in-law next door. So in the first couple of entries I talked about the background of the key characters of the story and some of the kind of traumatic episodes and the pretty harsh backstory and upbringing of the husk. So I'm going to cover some more kind of background, but in relation to my sort of getting to know and understand how the husk operates in the first kind of, I would say, to start with, say 10 or so years. So as I've said previously, she was always kind of controlling and made the beacon, going to visit our grandparents every Saturday, and that sort of just kind of authoritative, very controlling parent. Strict rules, must be at home very strictly at this time. On my first date with the beacon, when we were 16, we went to the pictures to see Suburban Commando. You can tell how long ago this was. Hulk Hogan. And afterwards, after the pictures, I asked her if she wanted to go to one of the bars in the town and have a game of pool and maybe a glass of beer, glass of cider, whatever it was. She drank back as an underage 16-year-old. But you know, that was the norm back then. Don't know what it is now, but as soon as you got to the age of about 16, you started hitting the pubs and the bars on a Saturday night. So anyway, on the night after the pictures, she wasn't allowed to go to the pub until she phoned the husk to ask for permission. And I mean, this is, on one hand, you might think that's quite normal, just checking in, but as long as you're home by a certain time, and as long as your parents are aware that you do have the occasional alcoholic drink, which they were, then she shouldn't have to check in. As long as she's home by the right time. And obviously this is going back to 1992, 92 into 93. There was no mobile phones, or certainly mobile phones weren't part of everybody's luggage. So anyway, you had to go to a phone box to make these phone calls. Put a 10 pence piece in, actually dial a number and wait for somebody to answer on the other end. So she did that, phoned the husk, and the husk gave her very, very strict rules that she could only have 2 halves of cider. And I suppose that's not too kind of controlling. This is a 16-year-old girl at the end of the day, but it was very clear, 2 halves of cider. And she wasn't allowed to go to the pub that I suggested. Instead, the husk told her which pub she was allowed to go to. And these 2 pubs, the one that I suggested and the one that the husk insisted on, there's nothing between them in terms of, clientele, reputation, all the rest of it. They're both as rough as a badger's backside. So it made no difference. There's no real logic to that at the time, and maybe now I understand why. So that was early indication of all these things were an early indication that she was obviously had a strict mother. And then as time went on, I wouldn't say I had any concerns. She just had a strict mother, and she had to be at home at a certain time. She couldn't have friends over. She wasn't allowed friends over at the house. Whether that was because, and I think that was because the husk was always out working, and she obviously didn't trust her. Very, very, very mature and responsible daughter to have friends in the house, girlfriends. So the Beacon didn't have a average teenage experience in that sense. She never had sleepovers. Whoa, no way. Because the excuse was that, stepdad wouldn't tolerate it. But that never came from the stepdad. That always came from the husk. Was that an excuse? Just scapegoating? Just to blame somebody else? To basically control her daughter? Who knows? But at the time, I didn't have any real concerns. Just a young teenager. And I think she left school and then she went on to college, the Beacon that is, and obviously became more independent. And then, it wasn't long she was going to university, studying law, at which point, pretty much she was fully independent, but still living at home. She went to university in a sort of home city, or close to home. As she finished university, she went straight into employment, and it wasn't long before we were getting our first house together in 1999. So we had been together, I think it must have only been about 6 or 7 years at that point. It seemed like an eternity back then, 7 years. So we got our first home. It was a brand new little starter home, if you want to call it that. Got our first mortgage and our first step into the real world. I was working in a bookmaker's at the time, assistant manager in a bookmaker's. I went on to become a manager later before I left, and she had her new career. And yeah, I seem to remember at the time thinking that the husk is going to struggle with her flying the nest. I do remember having those thoughts and feelings, and obviously that tells me now that I was obviously aware that she was a bit controlling and was going to struggle with letting her beacon fly away. My experience from living with the beacon early doors, and my memory is that, you know, there was an expectation to have a phone call, and at least a phone call every week, and visit a certain expectation. I'm not saying that those expectations were met. More than likely weren't, because the beacon is a wild heart. You can't tie her down to rules and restrictions. But there was definitely a sense of the beacon was fully aware that if she hadn't called her exactly, you know, within the expectations and the time frame of 1 week every week, the beacon was fully aware that her mum, the husk, would go into what I would just call a huff, and I don't know, I'm going to guess that's widely understood, that word, a huff, but it basically means go silent like a child and sulk in the corner. But obviously she could tell, she just knew it intuitively, and then the impact of that on the beacon would be, I know when I ring her, she's going to be in a sulk with us, and she's going to make passive aggressive comments which are hurtful, and that I'm not going to be able to stand up to her because she's me mum, and I just want to keep the peace with me mum. That's not how she would behave with anybody else. That's how she would behave with her mum, with the husk. Because what daughter wants to argue with the mother, especially if it's kind of trivial stuff like, you didn't ring last week. So the beacon knew intuitively that if she hadn't contacted her in the specified timescales, that should be in a huff. So she would put it off and put it off and put it off, and that's totally understandable. You're just doing something out of duty, and that's not what a mother-daughter relationship is about. It should be about obviously mutual respect that your daughter's got her own life, respect that you've had your life, you've had your youth, and your daughter doesn't owe you anything, and when you do get a phone call, you should be eternally grateful. And that's how it should work. So rightly so, she would put this off and put this off and put this off, and obviously she knew that she was in a vicious circle, because she's just making it worse. And the worse it gets, the bigger the huff, and the more the passive aggressive comments and hurtful comments are going to come her way when she does eventually ring her or visit in the person. It's a vicious circle that just gets worse and worse and worse and worse. And this is pure manipulation. It's pure fear. Fear tactics and control. Fear, obligation and guilt. She's fearful of not meeting her obligation, even though it shouldn't be an obligation. And then she feels guilty if she hasn't done it. that is emotional blackmail. And at that age, so now I'm in my mid-20s, at that age I'm absolutely aware of what this is in terms of manipulation and guilt tripping and huffy, silent treatment behaviour. But, you know, you don't think about things too much at that age, or certainly I didn't. You were aware of it, and basically I would just ignore it and just help her deal with the fact that our mother can be huffy sometimes. And the other effect of that behaviour on the beacon was making her feel like she was constantly on eggshells and that she had constantly done something wrong, which she hadn't. Nothing wrong with not contacting your mother every week when you're living and working and you're independent. There's nothing wrong with that. So she would feel like walking on eggshells, constantly feeling like she's done something wrong, but that wrongdoing wouldn't be communicated to her. Obviously the husk would just go silent. Nothing was ever communicated, and constantly feeling like you've done something wrong, and constantly, her words, Beacon's words, constantly feeling like you're being tested, like you're not good enough, and if you don't pass the test, you've failed, you're a failure. And for a young, obviously this would have obviously been not new behaviour. So for a young woman in her early to mid 20s to have to deal with that, it's pretty hard hit. And to think that she went through that same treatment as a teenager and probably as a young girl, how she's come out like a beacon of light, anybody's guess. I've got no idea. I really haven't. Again, I'm going to guess it's due to the fact that she had stability for 7 years and then she took responsibility in her own little mind to be the strong figure of the family. I'm the daddy now. And you know, that constant feeling of being tested and you're a failure and you're not good enough, in my mind now, that's what the husk needs her to feel, because the beacon is everything that the husk isn't, and that's a threat. There's envy, and she needs to destroy the light. That's my opinion now. But anyway, back to this behaviour of feeling not good enough. So this just went on throughout our sort of the first 10 years or so. Let me just think quickly. 16 years of living together. We had to deal with this treatment, and the beacon would regularly say, I'm sure the husk thinks that me and her just swan through life without a problem in the world, and that we've got it easy, and that we're just sitting around twiddling our thumbs if we're not having a social life, and we're just ignoring it, like, you know, we're some sort of lazy people. And that couldn't be further from the truth. Yes, we did have a good social life back in those days. Why not? But we were far from lazy, and we were far from sitting around twiddling our thumbs. And the beacon would do anything for a man, anything for the husk. And that's absolutely 100% true. Anything back then. So that was the impression that the Beacon and I were getting from the way we were being treated. That we were ungrateful, didn't appreciate her enough, and that we just had an easy life. And she's had a tough life, hasn't she? I mean, I'm saying that sarcastically. She has had a tough life of her own doing, apart from the losing the firstborn. That wasn't her fault, as far as I know. So, yeah, she has had a tough life. But apart from that one event, every single event in her life is her decision. Her decision. And your decisions, you put your decisions out into the universe, and the universe will deliver you the consequences of your decisions. It's as simple as that. So chip on our shoulder and makes the Beacon feel guilty. So where were we? So yeah, the first kind of 15, 16 years of living together. Bear in mind, during that period we moved house a couple of times up the property ladder, so to speak. We renovated 2 old houses, completely renovated them. We learned a lot of sort of DIY skills along the way, and became very, very competent in sort of designing our new homes and renovating them, and doing as much as what we could by ourselves. Very, very, very busy people, holding down stressful full-time jobs, stability, but also very, very busy. And we don't expect any sympathy, but we expect some respect. And we also got married during that period. After this was 2004, and we also had our daughter in that period, 2010. So this is, when I say that period, the 16 years of living, the first 16 years of living together. And everybody, pretty much the characters in this story just think that we've got it easy. Just think that all of this lands on our lap. Having a nice house, a beautiful daughter who has absolutely no problems whatsoever. Financial stability. Yeah, this is all just luck and coincidence. We're just lucky, and we're just lazy people. So another good example of how aware I was back in 2004. So this is after we've been together nearly 13 years, and we decided to get married on the eve of the wedding. Obviously it's traditional for the bride and groom to be not to spend that night together, and obviously for the bride to have her bridesmaids stop over and then all get ready in the morning. So the Beacon did that at our home, had the bridesmaids over on the eve of the wedding. I obviously made myself scarce, and instead of stopping at my own parents' house on the eve of my own wedding, no, I didn't stop there, did I? Guess where I stopped? I stopped at the Husk's house with her and stepdad. And guess why? And this is absolutely 100% true. The reason I stopped at the Husk's on that evening was to savour going into a huff. because her daughter was with her friends on the eve of our wedding and not with her mother. And I stopped there to kind of try and balance everything. And yeah, this is the eve of my wedding, and I'm stopping at the Husk's house. I'm not stopping at my own parents, I'm not stopping at my best man's, I'm stopping at the Husk's house. So that gives an idea of how aware I was, and how aware I was that she is capable of ruining the Beacon's big day. That's what that tells you. And I'm willing to put myself second to what I want, just to keep the Husk happy, because effectively all I'm doing is keep my wife happy, which is what I want. So that's what I did on the eve of my own wedding. And then the next significant event in that period, the period of living together for the first 16 years. Let me just... And in amongst all of this as well, there's never any validation. There's always cruel behaviours with a smile. You know, if you're cruel with a smile, I was only joking. Would often just say insulting things about new bits of furniture. You know, when we're renovating houses and we get a new piece of furniture, and you'd show somebody, and you know, the worst thing that can happen is the fake enjoy, the fake like it. But no, not the Husk. I'm quite happy to say she thinks it's disgusting. But she, you know, she does it in a way where there's some sort of element of light-heartedness, but she's saying it. It's what she means, and she's got no empathy and no consideration for our feelings. And that's another important part, is she wouldn't do that to roadkill. There is no way she would treat roadkill, and she doesn't treat roadkill like this. Roadkill is a different kettle of fish altogether. Her and the Beacon are chalk and cheese. Roadkill does not have the self-confidence of the Beacon. She doesn't have the self-esteem. That much has been absolutely blatantly obvious for the 33 years that I've known roadkill. But don't get me wrong, that's not why the Husk would spare her feelings, because she doesn't spare anybody's feelings. She has no empathy. The reason why she doesn't treat roadkill like that is because she's not a threat to her. She's pretty much on the same level in terms of you know, she just hasn't got the same, you know, frequency or vibration or aura or personality, self-esteem, charisma, success, depending on how you measure success. Well, both in the physical world and in the spiritual world, she hasn't got the same success as the Beacon. So the way I see it is, plus she's also got roadkill completely under control. She is, you know, yes ma'am, no ma'am, 3 bags full ma'am, whatever you say ma'am. You know, she's a conformist. I think I covered that. She's a conformist, she's a people pleaser, and she's a peacekeeper. And she'll do anything if she's made to feel like she's got an obligation to. And the husk has got her right where she wants her. So there's no need to try and break her. She's already broken. You know, like a wild horse is broken. The wild heart cannot be broken. The beacon cannot be broken. And that's my honest held belief of what's going on in that little triangle. It's almost like, you know, it comes across as the scapegoat and the flying monkey. One's the enabler, one child's the enabler, and the other one's the scapegoat. And it creates division, hostility, potentially hostility, and ultimate divide and conquer and control for the husk. So it's a little bit more about how she would treat it, the beacon. And then the last significant event that I think I need to mention of that first 16 years of living together is at the end of that 16 years, so we had lived in 4 different houses, renovated 2 old houses, full renovations, so to speak. We had obviously furthered our careers. I had left the bookmakers and got a job in the civil service, and then the beacon developed a career to senior management level, etc., etc. We also had a child, a beautiful daughter, and we still had a decent, you know, a fairly, modest social life, but we had the balance pretty perfect. Everything was perfect in terms of, you know, stability and only, you know, optimism for the future. So at the end of this period, 16 years, we decided to take a huge move and move out of the large town that we lived in, which had basically nothing to offer for our young daughter. It's a completely different town to what it was when the beacon and I grew up back in the 70s and 80s. Completely different, nothing to offer at all, and, you know, no sort of real optimism. And we always had a bit of an urge to move to somewhere more rural, escape to the country, so to speak. And we looked about, we had a few ideas, we thought they were just pipe dreams, and then we came across a little village and just thought, why don't we just go view a couple of houses and just see how it feels, apart from anything else. If it doesn't feel right, then we can just scratch it off and get on with our life. So we came up to the village, viewed 2 houses, and absolutely fell in love with the place. Absolutely perfect. Sat in the local pub and had a bar meal and a drink, and just looked at each other and said, I want to live here. And this was a huge move. Not only, you know, moving out of the town that you were kind of born and bred in into a place completely unknown and completely different lifestyle, i.e. small village where everybody knows everybody and everybody thinks to know everybody's business. Obviously these were big move factors contributed to it being a big move, but also distance away from the town and the husk and my own parents. but the opportunity for our daughter to grow up in a completely different environment, a much safer environment, much more friendly and neighbourly and communal environment with better schools and a better outlook for her as well as us, was nothing but positive, nothing but optimistic. And we decided that we would go for it. But the other risk was all of those things that I've just mentioned. But the other risk was we were going to tie ourselves down financially, more so than what we already were. And when you're moving house to a completely unknown place, that is an even bigger risk, because the last thing you want is to be tied financially and not be happy. So it was also a 200-year-old stone cottage that we ended up falling in love with as well. And obviously that has its own risks, buying an old property like that. But we were absolutely, ecstatic at the idea of this move. We were in absolutely no doubt whatsoever that this is what we wanted to do with our lives, all three of us. And my daughter was just coming up 5 at the time, just turned 5, and this was the perfect age, because that's the age that she was going into primary school. So it meant we were moving her into a school where everybody was new, joining at that age. So it would have been a much easier transition for her. So all good. And the reason that this story is relevant is because of the reaction of the husk. So I think you'll be in no doubt that a genuine mother would have nothing but excitement, joy and pride for her daughter and her granddaughter. Bear in mind, it was a 25-mile move, but 25 mile into the countryside, which made it feel much further. But 25 mile, half an hour in a car. So as far as the husk is concerned, that's nothing. You're not going to lose out on anything. You just need to put a bit more effort in. So anyway, long story short, given my experience and my awareness and my intuition, I decided on behalf of us both, I took the decision myself to tell the husk that we were moving before the beacon told her. And this was something I really struggled with in my own mind as to whether or not this was the right thing to do. But the reason I made that decision to tell the husk before the beacon had the opportunity to, the reason I made that decision was so that she didn't spoil it for her. So I'm obviously at this point, this is 2015, this is 10 years ago, at this point, and by the way, we're still in that house 10 years. We've never been in a house for 10 years. This has obviously turned out to be a dream come true and a forever home. So, yeah, the reason I chose to tell the husk first was so she didn't spoil it for the beacon. So I took the initial reaction and whatever was going to come with that. And as I rang her, I said, I've got something to tell you. and I'm trying to just gather my memory. I'm not going to say that this is exactly how I said it, but I'm pretty sure I told her that I've got some news for you, and Jill's going to tell you this news. Sorry, the beacon is going to tell you this news. And the reason I'm telling you now is so that you could be nothing but happy for her when she tells you. So, in other words, be warned. And I don't know how I did that. I knew how to do it. So that's how I put it. And she said, right, what is it? And I said, we're moving. And I give her, a basic sort of explanation of where we're moving to, because she didn't know where the place was. So I sort of described it to her, how far away it was, and she started crying. And she was crying in a a selfish way. What am I going to do? I'm never going to see my granddaughter, not my daughter, my granddaughter. And it was just pure selfishness. There was no questions around, why were we doing it, and there must be some good reasons. So can you tell us the good reasons, and so I can be happy for you. There was none of that. Just crying. And I pretty much said to her, don't do that to the beacon. Do not do that when she tells you. Please be happy for her. And I think she did. I can't quite recall. She definitely didn't react like that when the beacon eventually told her. And then obviously the beacon didn't know that I did this. So the beacon got something resembling a decent response. But it was still, she hugely struggled with us moving away. And that was obvious, and it was obvious to the beacon that the next few months leading up to this move was going to be hard. But again, it just goes to show that I obviously knew what she was like, and I obviously wanted to protect my wife, because I'm the protector.